Start any moment. Good morning, Gabriel. And I see Vanessa popped in, and Jacoy, and Angeline.
Uh, Hi, good morning.
Hello, good morning. And Kenneth is
Wait,
here, and Diana is here. Good morning, guys. And Genesee.
Most definitely,
What were you saying, Angeline?
my favorite burritos are definitely breakfast burritos.
Right? Same
I I'm not,
here.
also,
Absolutely.
Miss Mother,
Huh?
I thought it was burrito day already. Or is that different?
No, I think you know what? I just realized I think I had accidentally, hang on, it's not National Burrito Day. Hold on. I know what
Um,
it is. Let me fix this.
did I remind you?
It's it's National Make Lunch Day Count. Let me go back. Let me fix this. Oops. Okay. Let's make that black so you guys can, oh, I don't know, actually see it. Oops, wrong one. Woo!
oh my
Okay,
god.
again. I am
Ew.
just having a morning, guys. It has just been a crazy morning already.
We're not even a minute into class and we're already having a problem with the fonts.
No, no, I just, I got a little crazy, a little wild on the sides there. All right, so it's National Make Lunch Count Day. So, like, what are you guys going to do? And I see a whole bunch of you guys are popping in here, so I can't catch you all name by name. But good morning, everybody. What are you guys going to do for lunch? Like, are you going to, a lot of kiddos just kind of grab something on the run, maybe. So today, I think the idea is like, you know, make it count, right? You're gonna eat it. Okay. But like, what are you gonna have for lunch so that it's something that you can oh, grilled cheese, Ryan? There you go.
I'm probably gonna make like a sushi bowl because that's one of my favorite things to eat.
Oh, you like to make sushi rolls? That's
Yeah.
amazing. That takes concentration. So
It's not that hard.
really?
Well,
I think it
maybe
depends on what you put in it, maybe.
yeah, I don't do that much. It's not that extravagant. I get crab, I cut it up, chop it up, I put cream cheese and mayo, and I mix it together with white rice, soy sauce, and a little bit of sweet soy sauce, avocados, tomatoes, depending how I'm feeling. And yeah.
Oh my goodness. Now I need to go get sushi tonight.
And then I'll have like and then I'll have like I forget what it's called. Seaweed on the side to eat with
Uh-huh.
the sushi bowl. But sometimes
Nice.
if I'm feeling a little extra, creative, I'll put fried shrimp into mixed with the
Okay, so you
crab.
do it like a sushi bowl instead of actually rolling it?
Yeah, I do it into sushi bowl.
Okay. And I am loving this. Who did I just see? Demi, you said you guys are going to have a picnic. That's awesome. I love that idea and getting together with your friends. So not only are you feeding, your body, right? But you're also feeding like your social, emotional needs, right? By having a picnic with friends and you're outside because come on now, the weather's, kind of nice, starting to get nice finally. I see orange chicken, which sounds amazing. Braxton, what do you mean? Probably nothing. You need to have something. And Taj, you're not going to make anything for lunch? Do you guys just grab something quick? Is that what you do? You just, okay. You're not hungry, Braxton? Okay. Well, I mean, you've got a couple of hours to think it through. Maybe you can do something with the chips, right? And orange chicken isn't as good as it sounds. Is it homemade orange chicken? I'm seeing Samuel. Oh, you don't like eating? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. McDonald's? Hey, you know what, Naisa? Like sometimes you just gotta have the Mickey D's because let's be honest, they have like the best French fries ever. right? I'm probably just gonna have leftovers from dinner last night. So, but I'll sit down and I'll like maybe step away from my desk. Maybe that'll be how I celebrate it, right? Like walk away from the desk so that I'm not, because I spend all my time at the desk right here. So maybe I'll just walk away from the desk kind of thing. And maybe that's all you guys can do, right? Maybe that's how you celebrate it. You walk away from where you're sitting at the desk or wherever you are doing your classes. Maybe you just kind of take a step away for 20 or 30 minutes. And maybe that's how you celebrate it. And that's how you make lunch count. So it's not like you're eating and trying to do like a bunch of things all at once, right?
Miss,
Yes, Adriel?
I think you skipped over mine, or did you already say it and I just wasn't paying attention?
Yeah, I did. I did. I've been
Oh,
like running through them as I'm going through.
oh, you weren't just like,
No, I just been there's a like a lot of them as I was having the craziness with trying to figure out like the fonts. Like a bunch of you guys just started throwing stuff down in there, so I've just been kind of catching as I going.
oh, okay.
I know, Ryan. I see that. Who doesn't um eating? And I'm like, right? I love to eat. Wait. Imagine being short. Are you tall, Braxton? Okay. I am not. I'm not tall at all. I'm only 5'5", so I have to use step stools, ladders, climb on counters. There you go. Well, yeah, but Adriel, you guys are in junior high. 6'1", Kenneth. Now you say you're 5'9", 6 feet, and you guys are nowhere close to being finished in your growth spurts. And there you go. And for you guys, like, listen, my brother-in-law was like 5'5" in high school, and right after he graduated from high school, he like grew 4 more inches. So yeah, I know, Emily. Those of us who are short, like it's like we hit our short height, and then like we never we stop, right? Exactly. I always say I'm like, I joke about, now you say, yep. Well, and that's the thing. Girls tend to grow taller faster. So we get to a certain height in junior high, and then all of a sudden, once you guys hit high school, then the boys start getting taller. Yes, Adriel?
I mean, I don't know how tall I am, but all I know is that I am taller than my mom.
Okay. Well, and
So,
you have still got time. That's the crazy thing about it. You still have time, right?
oh,
Oh yeah, you're still gonna grow. You still have a good 6 to 7 years of growth. Your mom's 5'5", right? So my son is 6 foot. Mom is 5'5". He thinks it's really entertaining, you know, to use my head as like an armrest. So yeah, it is. And my husband is 6'3". So, it is definitely, I'm 5'5", my husband is 6'3". So yeah, entertaining to say the least. All right, so hopefully you guys will take a moment. Oh, wow. 6 feet. Now, my stepsister is 6 feet. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. My younger sisters are taller than I am, too. All right. So, hopefully, you guys are thinking to yourself, make lunch count day. So, I hope that you guys take at least 20, 30 minutes away from wherever you're doing your work to eat something, maybe go outside, to do something to make your lunch time period count. Okay. We need to finish up the Cold War. So, Module 9, Lesson 2, we have our course arc in our journal. we were on in our course arc. If you don't have yours open, if you guys can open it up to World War II, this is where we were at yesterday when I was like, oh my goodness, it's time. So we had talked about, what had taken place on the Eastern Front, right? In the Pacific Theater. Okay, Emily, you're ahead of us. I just want to make sure that everybody has got it done and you get the correct information. Okay. So we talked about I think we had gotten through like the Doolittle raids, where basically they were island hopping and trying to inflict as much damage as possible. The Battle of Midway was the Japanese were like, hey, we're going to try and take out as many of the aircraft carriers and ships that we missed in Pearl Harbor. The Battle of Okinawa was exceedingly bloody. Ultimately, after 3 months of severe fighting, the Americans prevailed. And then we talked about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those were the 2 atomic bombs that we had dropped. And then we were working our way through this. I could not remember how far we had gotten or where exactly we were. So I figured I would just have this ready to go to make sure we were there. So we know your dad was born in Okinawa. Okay. My dad was stationed in Okinawa for it was like a short layover when we went from the United States. We were in Japan for about 4 months, and then we moved and transitioned over to Thailand. So, all right. So the atomic bomb dropped on August 6th, 1945 was the one in Hiroshima. We lost 33 ships and nearly 350 were damaged here, and that was during Okinawa. Japan was hoping to sink as many. Yeah, he was. My father was too. Hoping to sink as many of American ships as survived Pearl Harbor, which was Midway. The offensive raids against Tokyo, Kobe, and Osaka in 1942 were the Doolittle raids. And then Pearl Harbor, the day that will live in infamy, December 7th, 1941, Japan bombing Pearl Harbor. Okay, so does everybody have these done in your course arc? Yes? All right, so we can move on to the next. All right, so I actually have to click on this to take us into another one. So when talking about Asia, it's important to remember the Middle East that we hear about regularly, and we're going to actually do a whole section on the Middle East as well because of all the issues that have taken place there. Let me see. Let me get to, because I actually have to open this up in YouTube.
The collapse of the Ottoman Empire did not immediately bring long-awaited Arab independence to the Middle East. During World War I, Britain and France had secretly partitioned the region into their own areas of influence under the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And Britain backed a national homeland for the Jewish people within Palestine in its Balfour Declaration. In the struggle to oust European powers in the decades that followed, Arab nationalism often overshadowed recurring tensions in the region between Sunni and Shiite Muslims, or between ethnic groups like the widely dispersed Kurds calling for an independent state. Israel's declaration of independence triggered an 8-month war with Arab states and a continuing conflict with the Palestinians over disputed borders and occupied land. Western independence on Middle East oil shaped political alliances in the region, home to most of the world's reserves, the US-Saudi partnership, for example. Despite supporting Baghdad in the Iraq-Iran war, Washington and Riyadh-led forces evicted Iraq from oil-rich Kuwait in the First Gulf War. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the US invaded Iraq on the since discredited claim it had weapons of mass destruction. After nearly 9 years of occupation, troops withdrew. At a time of renewed instability, the Arab Spring uprisings toppled regional strongmen and a civil war took hold in Syria. Sectarian fighting and internal conflict facilitated the rise of jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda and, more recently, the Islamic State organization.
All right. So that was kind of more, I know, for about 1 second. That was kind of more like modern day information. Okay. When we do the Middle East as a whole entire section, we will actually talk about, during the Cold War and also like Afghanistan and all of those things, bringing them forward. Yeah, no, that's going to be when we get to the Middle East, Samuel. We're not there yet. All right. So when did the U.S. leave Iraq? Good, 2011. During World War I, what two countries partitioned parts of the Middle East? Was it France and Britain? We'll look. Okay. What year did Israel declare its independence? 1948. Good. All right. Any questions? Does everybody have these done? Do we have these all completed? Okay, Taj has his. The rest of you guys, we're good? Okay. All right, so Google Map Tours. So this is one of the two items that we're doing in our journal, okay? So obviously, every time we do the Google Map Tours, you have to click on the link to the Google Map. I don't know what you're saying, Adriel. What do you mean, wait, Emily? We just had those 3 questions. All I've done is I just opened up the Google Maps. That's all I've done so far, Emily, okay? Anytime we're in here, when it talks about the Google Map Tour, you have to click on the Google Maps because that's the picture is your link to the sites that we're going to go to, okay? So when we click on here, we have different sites. We have Tibet, okay, which is in China. We have Iwo Jima, which kind of falls within the Pacific Theater and those battles. We have Pearl Harbor, kind of the kickoff of what really kind of pushed us into World War II. We have Vietnam and their Civil War, which is the discussion part of your writing prompt, and then Mongolia, okay? So when you click on each one of these, we have to look at what they're talking about. So in Tibet, when they were talking about this, there was a lot of like internal issues taking place in Tibet itself. It was an area of its own. Remember when we've looked at China, there were lots of areas, and we have the dynasties like the Qin dynasty kind of trying to bring everybody together. But remember, that was all along the eastern portion. The western portion, which was like the Turkmenistan desert and the Tibetan plateau and all of that, they were so far away, they kind of did their own thing. Okay, and they weren't kind of folded in until a little bit later. So there was like a struggle and issues within the Tibetan area. It was when, so like Buddhism backed up and then Buddhism moved forward. A series of Tibetan priests, they're called Tibetan lamas, actually kind of like tried to revitalize this area. We know in the 13th century that Genghis Khan conquered Tibet and they ruled the region for the next century. When Yuan dynasty fell, Tibet gained their independence again. And then literally it wasn't until much later, until after like 1720, when the Mongols were kicked out of like the whole totalitarian, like the totality of China itself, and like allowed the Buddhists and the lamas to like take over their area. It is an area that has a lot of issues for China, where Like the Dalai Lama cannot live in Tibet because he actually has, like, China's like, if he shows up, he's dead. Because they fear that Tibet wants to be independent again. So there's been a lot of issues within just this region of China. Okay, a lot of conflict within China. Iwo Jima, key World War II battle where the United States captured the Japanese island of Iwo Jima. I think it shows you, this is like a very iconic picture right here of them planting the American flag on the soil for when we like captured Iwo Jima. It was a turning point in the Pacific Theater during World War II and the stepping off point for the Battle of Okinawa, which would follow shortly thereafter. Basically, it was the turning point where we started winning more battles than losing, if you will. Pearl Harbor, we know this was Japan bombing the ships that were in Pearl Harbor. It is the official kind of like the reason we used to become involved in World War II. Because remember, Japan and Hitler, so Japan, Germany, and Italy were all together. So when Japan attacked us and we responded to Japan, it also meant we were going to take on Italy and Germany. Okay. We have Vietnam, which we watched a video. We have a writing prompt. I've got a short, like 3-minute video just to help you remember before we do our writing prompt. Remember, this was like a civil war between Northern and Southern Vietnam. Northern Vietnam wanted to be communist. Southern Vietnam did not. France was involved in this from when they had colonized them. France, finally eventually gets kicked out. We get involved in their own internal civil war. It is not pretty. We had issues with it. Americans had a really bad problem with it. It was very hard to tell the difference between Northern and Southern Vietnamese. And ultimately, Vietnam is communist. So everything that we got involved in to help the Southern Vietnamese ultimately ended up not happening. And then Mongolia. So, Mongolia is right between Russia and China, right? And that's where the Mongols come from. So we have like Temujin, which is Genghis Khan. We have them coming from the Mongolian steppes and like spreading across, China and all throughout Asia. And really having this massive Yuan dynasty that ruled for many, many years. The sad part about it is today, Mongolia is not a rich country. Most of the people there are relatively still nomadic and relatively poor. So they go from this huge history to not a whole lot. So what we have in all of these areas is we're talking about both internal conflict within the country, Tibet, Vietnam, right? Mongolia, and external, right? In World War II, Iwo Jima, Pearl Harbor. So when we are talking about the journal, which I don't have anything written, I'm going to wait for you guys to tell me, how do all these points relate to the topic of the lesson, and what do they have in common? So I need you guys to give me something to put in here. What can we put? And you can either unmute, you can type in the chat. But I'm waiting for you guys to give me something. I mean, I can get you started, but I'm not going to give you everything. So all of the points in the right? So they're all located in Asia. What else do we need to put in here? Is anybody going to give me anything? I'm not giving you the answer. I'm waiting for you guys to help me out with this. All right. Well, it's 10:25, which means we don't have time to just do this. You guys think about what you want to add to this, because the next part that we have is our writing prompt, or the journal writing. So we're talking about American involvement in Vietnam. So we look at the timeline that is on this map, and it shows that the United States was involved in the conflict of Vietnam for quite some time. As the war escalated and dragged on, it became extremely unpopular in the United States. The United States would lose nearly 58,000 lives of soldiers, and that would be on top of several million civilians that were killed. So what we see are the little stars are actual, like the Gulf of Tonkin, U.S. air raids, the Hue Tet Offensive, the My Lai Massacre, the Tet Offensive. And by the way, when we're talking about the Tet Offensive, that is the North Koreans attacking the Southern Koreans during a major national holiday, the Tet holiday, which they had all agreed that during this national religious holiday that no fighting would take place. And so everybody like paused the fighting and they went to go celebrate, and the North actually invaded the South on that religious holiday. So the question is, should the United States have gotten involved? Why or why not? You have the ability to see how it all came out. Support your answer, okay? And I do have a with Vietnam, there really wasn't. Remember, during the time of Vietnam, so we're talking about the 60s, right? We are still in that fear of communism. We are in the fear of the domino effect, right? Russia becomes the Soviet Union. China has become communist. We are trying to keep as many countries from becoming communist. So we're not there because of raw materials or a market to sell our goods to. We are there because we are in fear of the spread of communism. Okay. I do have, it's like literally a 4-minute video. It's a quick history of the Vietnam War. Samuel, I didn't say we didn't get involved. Neither did Ryan. We're saying the reasons why we got involved. We did not get involved. You have to read, Samuel, before you just throw something out there. We did not get involved because of markets and raw materials, which is what many developed countries tend to do. But you have to go back in time and you have to look at the time period of what was going on and what prompted us to become involved. You can't look at it from the lens of 2023. You have to go back and go, okay, in 1960s, what's going on that would prompt the United States to become involved in this civil war that was taking place in Vietnam? Because that's what it was. It was a civil war in that country. All right, so let me do, so like I said, it's like 4 minutes. It's a brief history of the Vietnam War. Hopefully this will just help you guys kind of solidify what you want to think about and what you're going to write in the writing prompt, okay? I'm going to mute myself and then I'm going to play the video.
The Vietnam conflict was one of the longest, bloodiest struggles of the Cold War era. How did it start? And how long did it last? What most people call the Vietnam War began in 1946, and at the time, was known as the Indochina War. French forces fought against rebelling forces known as the Viet Minh. The two sides fought for nearly 10 years, and the end result was the creation of two nations, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam was led by its founder, Ho Chi Minh, who desired to gain control of the entire former French colony and institute communism nationwide. South Vietnam, under Ngo Dinh Diem, had established a republic. In 1959, North Vietnam, aided by the Soviet Union, attacked South Vietnam. The United States saw this as a Soviet effort to expand communism, and throughout the early 1960s, sent soldiers to South Vietnam in the form of advisors to assist the training of South Vietnamese forces. By 1963, 16,000 Americans were stationed in Southeast Asia. In August of 1964, 2 American ships were reportedly fired upon in the Gulf of Tonkin. This resulted in the U.S. Congress passing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave President Lyndon Johnson authority to conduct military operations in Vietnam in order to protect U.S. personnel. The first American combat troops arrived in Vietnam in 1965. Throughout South Vietnam, North Vietnamese supporters, known as the Viet Cong, fought a guerrilla war against U.S. and South Vietnamese troops. A guerrilla war is one in which hit-and-run tactics are used in order to avoid a direct military confrontation. The North Vietnamese Army also engaged in a more traditional, drawn-out war against American forces. U.S. involvement in Vietnam reached its peak with a Viet Cong attack known as the Tet Offensive. It's known by this name because it occurred during the Vietnamese holiday known as Tet. The Vietnam conflict was widely covered by the American media, and the effectiveness of the well-organized Tet Offensive by enemy forces greatly damaged public support for U.S. involvement in the conflict. Following this incident, the U.S. began the process of Vietnamization. This meant gradually turning the war over to the South Vietnamese as U.S. soldiers were slowly withdrawn. The fighting officially stopped in January of 1973 with the signing of the Paris Peace Accords. Once U.S. forces were completely withdrawn, the North Vietnamese resumed their attacks, and Vietnam was reunited as a communist nation, which it still remains today. Throughout the Vietnam conflict, well over 1 million Vietnamese died, and 58,000 American soldiers also lost their lives.
This is my comeback.
All right. So the last part of what we need to do on our journal is answer that question in our journal. Should the United States have gotten involved? So if you say yes, why? If you say no, why? You cannot just simply say yes or no. You actually need to explain your answer. So it is 5 to 8 sentences to answer this. Okay? Should the United States have gotten involved in the Vietnam conflict? Yes or no, and why do you think that? So right now, this is what you guys are doing. You are turning in your course arc now that it is completed. So for those of you who turned it in early and turned it in and got less than a minimum F, here's your opportunity to bring that grade up. Because remember, you can do these as many times as possible. And then you need to complete both the Google Map tour and the writing activity question prompt right now while you are in class with me. while you guys are working on that, because you've got about 20 minutes to complete your journal, I've got like a 17-minute, the second half of the Cold War oversimplified video that I will play while you guys are working on your journals. So does anybody have a question about what you are supposed to be doing? Okay, so everybody should be writing your Google tours, your Google Map tour response, and your writing prompt on whether or not we should have gotten involved, we as in the United States, and why you believe the way you believe. And like I said, I'll play this, which is the Cold War Oversimplified Part 2, while this is taking, like while you guys are writing.
Extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, and the closest the world has ever come to nuclear apocalypse. Shocked by the CIA's intrusive methods for putting down socialism in Latin America, a certain Fidel Castro met with a certain Che Guevara in a bar in Mexico City, and the two of them decided they should grow some awesome beards and overthrow the Cuban government, which is exactly what they did. Cuba had been America's summer playground, and America didn't like seeing a communist regime being set up in its own backyard. So the US immediately began training up Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. However, as the day of the operation came closer, Kennedy wanted to conceal any US involvement in the plan, so he massively scaled back American air support, and as a result, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating defeat for America. But Castro felt there was still an impending US threat to his regime. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev had a lot of medium-range nuclear missiles that couldn't reach America, but they could if they were positioned, say, on an exotic Caribbean island off the coast of Florida. Hey, I'm a communist who hates America. You're a communist who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just gonna suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh, no, you're right. That's a better idea. Be still, my beating heart. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane over Cuba noticed something strange. Sir?
So hopefully you're kind of getting the idea. Prior to us actually sending troops into Vietnam, all of this was taking place. We have the Soviet Union trying to put missiles in Cuba. We have the standoff with them. There's a lot of issues and fear over the spread of communism. So if this is going on, can you see how the idea of communism spreading throughout Asia, that fear was a very real fear to a lot of people. And that also helped lead us into the whole getting involved in the Vietnamese Civil War.
You need to look at this photograph. You're right. That's the cutest dog I've ever seen. Sir, I was referring more to the Soviet missiles. America freaked out as they realized what was going on. They were completely vulnerable, and they had to act fast. They knew that airstrikes or an invasion of Cuba would likely mean nuclear war with the Soviet Union. So Kennedy came up with another idea, a blockade. The US Navy announced it would stop and search any Soviet ships heading to Cuba, and would sink any that did not comply. In response, the Soviet put its military into full combat readiness. The US did the same, and began drawing up plans for an attack on Cuba. Things were escalating fast, and both superpowers were getting ready for World War III. Emergency communications between the two sides broke down as Khrushchev rejected Kennedy's demands for the missiles to be removed. And for the first time in history, US Strategic Air Command moved to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 means nuclear war. The Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. A Soviet nuclear submarine in the Caribbean mistakenly believed war had already broken out, and two of the senior officers gave the go-ahead to fire its nuclear torpedo. Thankfully, the third senior officer, this beautiful man, refused to authorize the decision. The US finalized its preparations, and I kid you not, the day before the US were set to decide the day and time for their Cuban invasion, Khrushchev was like, hey, you know if you just removed your missiles from Turkey, we'd remove ours from Cuba? Yeah, that sounds good to me. It was a bit more complicated than that, but at the last second, the two sides finally came to an agreement. Soviet missiles were shipped out of Cuba, and the world breathed one gigantic sigh of relief, except for one guy, who was bloody livid. Phew! Let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. Unfortunately for him, his presidency was to end.
There are some things that go better together.
Burger and fries, soup and salad.
Like your workplace benefits and retirement savings. With Voya, considering all your financial choices together can help you make smarter decisions.
Voya, well planned, well invested, well protected.
End with one. Having nearly blown up the planet, a few changes were made. First, the superpowers agreed to a limited test ban treaty. Secondly, the Soviets ousted Khrushchev and replaced him with Leonid Brezhnev, who was a kisser. He liked to kiss. Both sides were deeply concerned at the prospect of nuclear war, but still, the arms race raged on throughout the 60s and 70s. US intelligence worked out that the Soviets' nuclear arsenal was not as powerful as they previously thought, but in fact, it was America that held the advantage. ABMs and MIRVs were developed, and the doctrine of MAD. If both sides knew they would be completely destroyed by a nuclear war, neither would risk starting one. But even without war, the world was already feeling the effects of nuclear weapons. In 1966, above the pleasant town of Palomares in Spain, a US bomber collided with a tanker mid-air, and 4 hydrogen bombs fell and landed near the town below. It hasn't exploded, so I'm sure everything's fine. Whoa, boy. Hey, I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Okay. What were you gonna do today? Go for a swim? Yeah, I wouldn't. Are you breathing right now? Yeah? Yeah, I wouldn't. It took the Americans 2.5 months to find one of the bombs, which had gone missing in the ocean. This was the 14th time America had lost a nuclear bomb since 1950. Nobody knows how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East, Vietnam. Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into two. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Vietnam under their own regime. So the north established the National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the south with Soviet support. The US sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese to deal with the threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong. And over the next decade, the situation escalated to a breaking point. America feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops. And so in they went. From 1965, America found itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before. Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier. Did you see him? Of course not. That's because millions of young American men were drafted and sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle as its shield. It was nearly impossible to tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city of Saigon found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder. The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it justice in this video. But in terms of the Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many global conflicts that signaled a turning point. Under the threat of nuclear war, the two superpowers began working to make their relationship more constructive, and as a result, their ideological battle shifted away from the potential of direct conflict and more towards attempting to influence smaller proxy wars around the world. In the Middle East, the Soviet Union provided aid against Israel during the Six-Day War, and then again when the US backed Israel during the Yom Kippur War. In Africa, the Angolan Civil War saw US-supported South Africans fighting Soviet-supported Cubans. In the conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia, the superpowers interestingly switched sides as regimes changed, and the US continued fighting the spread of communism in its own backyard, funding the famous Contra groups to fight the socialist junta in Nicaragua. These proxy wars were fierce enough to begin with, but superpower intervention amplified the destruction and created alarming levels of human suffering throughout the Third World. And in Vietnam, that human suffering was all being broadcast back home via good old television. Going into the late 60s, America was a changing nation. This became this. This became this. And this became this. The new slogan that was taking root: make love, not war. The majority of Americans did not approve of Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War, and in 1968, a silent majority elected law and order candidate Richard Nixon. As the Vietnam War appeared to be increasingly unwinnable, and public opinion turning increasingly sour, Nixon made the decision to begin bringing the troops home, and ended US involvement in Vietnam by 1973. 2 years later, the South fell. The Cold War was now taking its toll on both superpowers. In Russia, a huge percentage of the budget was still going to the military. People were still hungry, and they just didn't have access to the same lifestyle and goods as the West. And what did they have to show for it? They weren't even winning the space race anymore. Both sides needed to reduce spending in order to rescue their economies, and so both welcomed with open arms an easing of hostilities, otherwise known as détente. To improve relations, Nixon became the first US president to visit Moscow in 1972, and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including the 1972 SALT Agreement that limited nuclear weapons. Relations with China were even improving via ping-pong diplomacy when the US table tennis team went on a tour of the People's Republic. However, internally, China was still pushing anti-capitalist propaganda, which led to some mixed messages. Nixon even visited China in 1972, and it was a barrel of laughs.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
You put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism.
Give me a pair of them.
他是不是给我一对啊？
Everything was going great for Nixon, until it was uncovered that back home he was being a very naughty boy and violating constitutional protocol. I'm announcing today my resignation as president, and I'm passing the office to my vice president, Gerald Ford. Wow, you mean in America that people can actually remove their leader when he breaks the law? Why not just rule by force? Where's the corruption? And my first act as president is to pardon Nixon. Ah, there it is. After the whole fiasco, Americans decided what they really wanted was just a nice, safe guy who wouldn't cheat on them. So they elected Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna where they signed yet another strategic arms limitation treaty. It's an honor, Premier Brezhnev. Likewise, President Carter. Please don't do that. But that's not to say there was no longer any tension between the two sides, because there was. Heaps of it. Once again, the Soviet Union put down further attempts at reform and rebellion in the Eastern Bloc. The Euro missile crisis saw new and improved classes of intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe. In 1979, the Soviets thought it would be a good idea if they had their own Vietnam and invaded Afghanistan to prevent a US-sponsored Islamic insurgency. And in response to these various crises, Olympic Games were boycotted. Conservatives were concerned that US policy had become too soft, and in 1980, they decided they wanted a president who would be tough on communism, so they elected Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came in guns blazing. Concerned at the Soviet Union's human rights violations, he made a speech calling them an evil empire. And he also wanted to renew the arms race using technological advances in computing and lasers. He came up with the Space Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was basically a big defensive anti-nuke shield around the country. But a lot of people thought it was a pretty dumb idea. The Soviet Union perceived this shift in rhetoric as the USA getting ready for war, and they were feeling especially threatened as their relationship with their communist ally China had broken down. Relations took a big hit in 1983 when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner that had strayed into their airspace, and it looked like the world was going right back to mid-20th century Cold War tension. But then Brezhnev got really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and he was replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev. Coming into office in 1985, he was the real game changer.
Listen to your TV.
His philosophy differed a lot from previous Soviet leaders. He felt that the reason the Soviet system and economy was struggling was that it didn't allow the Soviet people to
Well, it looks like YouTube is going to do what it was doing yesterday, the circle of death. Right? All right, so let's see if we can get this to pop up. Maybe? All right, we're just going to pause it there because we're getting close anyway. Let's see if that'll play.
The restructuring of the Soviet political and economic systems and change very quickly took effect. People could criticize the government. They could enjoy Western pop culture. The media interviewed Margaret Thatcher, but most importantly, the Soviet people could now enjoy Pizza Hut. All hail to Gorbachev. He also knew that the arms race needed to end in order to rescue the Soviet economy, and a positive relationship with the West must be established. Constructive dialogue reopened and resulted in the INF Treaty, which saw all intermediate-range missiles eliminated, which was huge. Reagan's tone towards the Soviet Union began to soften, and things were looking up. But what would these reforms mean for the Eastern Bloc? For decades, the Soviets had been brutally suppressing any attempt at change. Now, would they be allowed? And that was the exact question on Hungary's lips when the Prime Minister visited Moscow. Gorbachev's response: he didn't necessarily agree with the reforms, but he wouldn't stop them either. He was prepared to let the Eastern Bloc choose its own future. This was massive, and the Hungarian leaders began planning free, multi-party elections. Poland followed suit, and also held elections in June. The anti-Soviet party, Solidarity, won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary, the barbed wire border between East and West was removed. The Iron Curtain was unraveling. But not all Eastern Bloc leaders were happy. Notably, East Germany was still ruled by a hardline Stalinist, Erich Honecker, and many East Germans were still eager to get out. They had been trapped by the Berlin Wall, but now they were doing the math. If they could travel to Hungary, and Hungary's border with the West was loosening, could they now make it to the West? That summer, East Germans decided Hungary was the latest top holiday destination. They traveled there in droves, and using various methods, tens of thousands crossed the border into Austria and the West. Honecker was furious and blocked travel to Hungary, but that civil liberties train had started rolling, and it wasn't stopping. Thousands more flocked to the West German embassy in Prague, where they stormed the fence around the embassy gardens, and a temporary refugee camp was set up. In September, deals were struck to allow the refugees to travel west via train. Back in East Germany, the people were running on a civil liberties high, and they wanted their next hit. Dissent was growing. Over time, demonstrations turned to mass protest, with plainclothes secret police officers doing their best to put down the dissent, but it had grown well out of their control. And worse, the biggest demonstration was yet to come. We're gonna put all of this down by force, right guys? Guys? Unfortunately, everyone had realized what he had not. This was bigger than them, and the entire East German Politburo voted him out of power. On November 4th, over 500,000 East Germans took to the streets of East Berlin. For many, there was still one big target left in their sights: that damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaotic announcement that the travel ban between East and West was being lifted. The change wasn't meant to take effect until the next day, and crossing guards still had orders to shoot on sight any who tried to cross. But that night, huge crowds gathered at the crossing points, and the guards were overwhelmed. In an astronomically historic moment, after decades of family separation and travel restriction, the people were allowed to pass through. East and West Berliners couldn't believe it and celebrated together throughout the night. Some even climbed the wall and began to topple it. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and a year later, Germany would be reunited. Elections in Bulgaria, a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia, and a violent one in Romania brought to an end communist authority in the Eastern Bloc. America decided it would be best if it just stayed away and let the change happen, as the anti-communist movement continued all the way back to Moscow. Gorbachev had given the people the freedom to demonstrate. Now, they demonstrated for an end to the communist single-party rule, and Gorbachev had to give in. For the first time in history, elections were held in which candidates not officially endorsed by the party were allowed to run. Ambitious rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, led a growing democratic movement. Now things here get quite confusing, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a complicated topic, so believe me.
All right, we're going to stop there, because when we start talking about how the Soviet Union, then basically all of these countries that you see here that were part of that Eastern Bloc, the buffer countries and everything, they start getting all of they become independent. We get into this area in Asia, which are what's known as the Stans, which is right here. This would be like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all of them. So a lot of this we'll kind of talk about when we talk about the Cold War and conflict in the Middle East. Okay. So hopefully at this point, you have finished your Google Maps and you've talked about, Iwo Jima and Pearl Harbor and being in the Pacific Theater. You've talked about Tibet, Mongolia, and Vietnam and their internal conflict and changing colonizers. Hopefully you have finished your question prompt on your writing prompt about whether or not you feel that the United States should have gotten involved in the Vietnam conflict and why or why not, okay? And with that, we are now actually officially done with class today. Tomorrow, don't forget, is small group meets in the morning, 10 to 11:45 in VLA Rather SSG. Yes, there will be a remind. Yes, there will be an announcement.